What if the key to the greatest mystery in human history has been hiding in plain sight, not buried under ancient ruins or locked away in forbidden archives, but painted centuries ago, right before our eyes, across the grand halls of Europe's oldest museums and in the private collections of the world's art elite? Thousands of masterpieces from the medieval and early Renaissance eras sit quietly, admired for their craftsmanship, their detail, their supposed authenticity. But there's something profoundly strange about them. Something so obvious, so universal, that almost no one ever notices it. Take a moment to imagine those old paintings. Sprawling landscapes of cities and fields, scenes of everyday life, portraits of kings and peasants, frozen moments in time rendered with meticulous care. The artists of those centuries were obsessed with accuracy. Every shadow, every fold of cloth, every brick of a castle carefully recreated. And yet, when you look closer, there's one thing missing. There is no sun. The object that dominates our sky, that defines every day of our existence, that has shaped religions, calendars, and the very rhythm of life, it's gone, absent. In hundreds of works, from 15th century tapestries to early engravings, the heavens are pale and empty. Even in scenes where the sky stretches endlessly over the horizon, there's light, yes, but no source of it. No golden sphere, no blinding flare, no radiant star. Just illumination from nowhere. At first glance, it seems like an oversight. Maybe the artists lacked the tools to depict intense brightness. Perhaps their pigments couldn't capture the glow of a sunlit sky. Or maybe they painted under gray clouds and dull light. Simple explanations, easy to accept, until you start to notice the pattern. Because it isn't one artist. It isn't one region. It isn't one century. It's everywhere. Landscapes of the Moscow Kremlin from the 1660s, panoramic views of Astrakhan, or early depictions of the Neva River, different painters, different schools, and yet the same eerie omission. The skies are empty, the light is there, but the source is gone, as though the very idea of the sun didn't exist. Now, consider the human instinct to record the world. From the moment photography was born, people pointed their lenses toward the horizon to catch the rise and fall of the sun. It's a reflex. We worship light. We chase it, paint it, frame it. So why did the artists of the past, the masters of light and shadow, ignore the most important object of all? Was it an unspoken artistic taboo? A stylistic choice? Or was it something far more disturbing? Something that forces us to question not just art history, but the very timeline of our civilization. Because if there truly was no sun for them to paint, then what kind of world were they living in? This single question, born from a silent sky, marks the beginning of one of the strangest investigations you'll ever encounter. A journey through forgotten art, lost technology, and forbidden knowledge. One that might just reveal that our world is far younger, far stranger, and far more artificial than we've ever been told. Welcome to Archivist's Vault. If you're drawn to the mysteries that history refuses to answer, the stories buried in plain sight, then stay with us. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear might change the way you look at every sunrise you'll ever see again. Let's begin. The mystery starts with a practical problem, something so ordinary that it almost escapes notice. If the people of the ancient world lived under a sky without a sun, how did they measure time? Our first clue lies in a technology so simple we take it for granted. The sundial. For most of us, it's the symbol of ancient ingenuity, a stick casting a shadow, turning the movement of the heavens into hours and minutes. Primitive, elegant, and ancient, or so we've been told. But here's where the story twists. Because when you actually examine the history of sundials, the real artifacts preserved in museums across the world, you discover something impossible. The oldest functional, complex sundials don't come from the pyramids or Babylonian temples. They don't date to Rome or Greece. In fact, they only begin to appear in the mid-1500s. One of the earliest known examples, a portable, wearable sundial, complete with a compass and adjustable parts, was crafted in 1554. It wasn't a simple stick in the ground. It was a precision instrument, finely engineered with moving components calibrated to different latitudes. A technology that demanded geometry, astronomy, and deep mathematical understanding. So ask yourself, how could civilizations that supposedly built the pyramids, mapped the stars, and erected monuments aligned to solstices fail to invent something as basic as a sundial until the 16th century? Unless, of course, there was a reason they didn't need one. The sudden appearance of these intricate timepieces marks a dramatic shift, not just in science, but in the very nature of reality itself. A shift that seems to align with the reappearance, or perhaps the arrival, of the sun as we know it. And that's only the beginning. Because this anomaly isn't confined to metal and stone, it's written into the very language of humanity itself, a silence so profound it echoes across the centuries. But to uncover it, we'll have to dig deeper, beyond paintings, beyond instruments, and into the words our ancestors spoke. Words that reveal not just what they saw, but what they didn't. When history loses its voice, language becomes the last witness. Every word we speak is a fossil, an imprint left by the realities our ancestors once knew. When a thing exists, humanity names it: fire, river, mountain, storm. The act of naming is the act of making real. But what happens when there is no word for something that should define existence itself? That is precisely what we find when we open the oldest surviving records of daily life, the letters and personal notes of people who lived 1,000 years ago. Forget the grand chronicles written by kings and priests, whose words were filtered through ideology and fear. Instead, imagine the raw voices of real people, merchants, craftsmen, peasants, scratching messages onto strips of birch bark, sending love, making deals, resolving debts. These are the oldest Russian manuscripts known to us, dating back to the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries. They speak of animals, of weather, of harvests and trade, but in thousands of preserved fragments, one word never appears: the word sun. It's not merely rare, it's absent. Completely. Think about what that means. In every human culture, the sun is central to life, the first clock, the first god, the rhythm by which everything grows and dies. For it to vanish from the vocabulary of a civilization is unthinkable. You can't farm, you can't travel, you can't even wake and sleep without reference to light. And yet these people, by all evidence, never mentioned it. How could that be? Were they forbidden to write the word, or did the object itself simply not exist for them? Language doesn't lie easily. It evolves slowly, layer by layer, like sediment. When a new phenomenon appears, it doesn't instantly gain a word. The word is earned, born through repetition, carried on the breath of 1,000 speakers, until it finds a home in the language. And when that word explodes into common use, when it suddenly floods the speech of poets and politicians alike, it means something changed. Something so dramatic that people needed new words to describe their new reality. That linguistic explosion happened centuries later. If we open dictionaries compiled from texts of the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, the transformation is staggering. The word sun is everywhere. It burns through the pages like fire through dry paper, no longer just a noun. It's a metaphor, a symbol, a cornerstone of meaning. There are phrases like, as eternal as the sun, sun-like, sunborn. There are cults of the sun, sects that worship light as transformation itself. It is as though, after a long age of silence, humanity suddenly rediscovered the sky. But words don't appear spontaneously. They are the shadows of things, of experiences lived and shared. The sudden birth of sun in language implies the sudden presence of the sun itself in the world. A new phenomenon so overwhelming that it reshaped both the heavens and the human mind. And here, the timelines begin to converge, because the word sun emerges in texts at precisely the same moment that complex sundials appear in Europe. At the same time, artists begin to paint skies blazing with gold and light after centuries of darkness. The 16th century, the dawn of what we call the Renaissance. Renaissance, rebirth. We were taught that it meant the rebirth of art, of science, of reason. But what if it was something far more literal? What if it was the rebirth of light itself? The coincidence of art, technology, and language is too perfect to ignore. It points to a single global event, a moment when humanity collectively looked up and saw, for the first time, a new star burning in the sky. And that event has a date. A year etched into every history book as the discovery of a new world. But what if it was not a discovery, but a creation? Not the finding of new lands, but the birth of a new reality. Because when you strip away the myths and metaphors, the patterns form something astonishing. Before 1492, no sun in paintings, no functional sundials, no word sun in living language. After 1492, the explosion of light, science, navigation, and life itself. The old world didn't just end metaphorically, it ended physically, and a new one began. Now imagine this. For millennia, humanity lived beneath a dim, cold sky, lit not by our current sun, but by something else. Then, one day, a new star appeared, flooding the world with warmth and color. It reshaped the land, the seasons, and the very fabric of human consciousness. That moment, 1492, was not the discovery of America. It was the arrival of the sun. But the question remains, what was in the sky before it appeared? Because light cannot come from nothing, something had to be there, something ancient, something now pale and dead. To uncover that, we must turn our gaze to the night. If our sun, the one we see today, appeared in 1492, then what lit the ancient world before that moment? Was the earth once shrouded in eternal night, a frozen wasteland where life somehow endured without warmth or light? Or was there another source, something older, colder, and now long dead, that gave light to a different kind of world? To find the answer, we don't need telescopes or satellites. We only need to look up. The answer is there, staring back at us every night. The pale, lifeless face of the moon. We're taught that the moon is a mirror, a barren sphere reflecting sunlight from millions of miles away. But when you look closely, that explanation begins to fracture. The light of the moon doesn't behave like reflected light. It isn't golden or warm. It's silvery, spectral, almost fluid. It doesn't burn. It chills. Moonlight turns dew into frost, color into gray, and heat into cold. A reflection, by nature, shares the qualities of its source. But moonlight is not sunlight dimmed, it's its opposite. If it truly reflected the sun's warmth, a concentrated beam of moonlight through a lens should yield heat, however faint. But it doesn't. No matter how you focus it, the temperature doesn't rise. The light of the moon carries no energy. It is not borrowed. It is remnant, residual, the echo of something that once burned. This strange contradiction has been with us for centuries. Ancient peoples called the moon the eye that died, the pale mother, the burnt god. Myths across continents describe an era when two suns ruled the sky and one of them fell. The second light, the one we call the moon, was once the first. It was our original sun, and when it burned out, the world changed forever. Now picture this. The earth, long ago illuminated by two suns. One old and fading, one young and fierce. The two danced in the sky, their twin light bathing the world in eternal dawn. Imagine a planet without night, an endless summer where crops never failed, and warmth blanketed every continent. This was humanity's true golden age. The myths of paradise, the stories of Eden, the memory of endless day, they all trace back to that time, a memory so deep it survived even through the rewriting of history. But light cannot last forever. Stars die. And our first sun, the moon, was no exception. As its energy faded, its glow dimmed from gold to white, from warmth to cold. The twin era ended in catastrophe. Volcanoes erupted. Seas boiled and then froze. A veil of ash dimmed the skies. That cataclysm, recorded in fragmented chronicles and myths from every corner of the world, has another name, the year without a summer. Official history attributes the sudden, global cold of that year to the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia, the most powerful volcanic event in recorded history. But what if the eruption wasn't the cause of the darkness, but merely one of its consequences? What if, in 1815, the first sun, the moon, finally died? Its fading light extinguished forever, leaving behind only the lifeless shell we see today, a ghostly cratered sphere drifting in silence, and with its death, winter was born. Before that year, there are reports, curious and rare, of a milder, softer world. Winters were gentler, snow less common, even in northern lands. But after 1815, the cold came to stay. Seasons hardened. Ice became a constant companion of life. Humanity learned to fear the dark. The death of the first sun marked the end of the old world's climate. And perhaps the final proof that what we call natural history is anything but. Because if one sun could die, another could be made to live. The idea seems impossible, But in the context of everything we've uncovered, the missing suns in art, the sudden appearance of sundials, the linguistic birth of the word sun, it begins to make an eerie kind of sense. What if the new sun, the one that appeared in 1492, was not born of cosmic chance, but manufactured? If the heavens themselves could be altered, if light could be switched on and off, then we are not living in a natural universe at all. We are living in a system, an engineered environment where celestial bodies are not distant giants, but local mechanisms, part of a controlled design. And that realization, that the sun itself may be artificial, leads to a terrifying new question. Who built it? Who turned it on? And perhaps most chilling of all, who might one day turn it off? Because the evidence suggests that our world has been reset before. Destroyed, rebuilt, and repopulated, each time with a new sun in the sky and a new story written into history books. If that's true, then what we call civilization may not be ancient at all. It may be recent, temporary. One more iteration in a long series of controlled experiments. And that means the next reset could already be on its way. Every investigation reaches a point where the evidence, no matter how strange, begins to form a pattern. A point where coincidences pile so high that they start to look like design. We've seen art that forgot the sun, technology that appeared centuries too late, and a language that only learned to describe light after the world itself was illuminated. Each thread alone is a curiosity. Together, they weave something larger, a tapestry that doesn't depict a natural world at all, but something built, a design. What if the appearance of the sun in 1492 was not a cosmic event, but an act of engineering? What if the heavens themselves, the sun, the moon, the stars, are not infinite bodies scattered across space, but parts of a localized, controlled system? An ancient philosopher once wrote, "The world is a stage, and we are the play." But what if he meant it literally? Imagine our world not as a vast planet spinning in an endless universe, but as a contained environment, a colossal terrarium. Every element, light, weather, time, precisely regulated. Every cycle measured. Every history written. It sounds impossible. And yet, when you look closely at how reality behaves, something feels constructed. The sun and moon, for instance, always appear the same size in the sky, an alignment so exact that mathematicians call it miraculous. The odds of such a coincidence, by random chance, are virtually zero. But if these two objects were part of the same mechanism, positioned at specific distances for specific effects, the perfection suddenly makes sense. It would be the mark not of chaos, but of craftsmanship, a manufacturer's signature written across the sky. And what if that manufacturer, that architect, wasn't divine in the traditional sense? What if it was something else entirely? Across mythologies, we find echoes of this idea. The Gnostics spoke of the demiurge, a lower creator who built a false world, a copy of reality governed by deception. In Hindu cosmology, the universe itself is Maya, illusion. Even modern physics flirts with the idea of simulation, suggesting that the laws of nature might be lines of code rather than divine decree. Different names, same implication. This world might not be original. If that is true, then everything we call history, every monument, every artifact, every book, could be part of the set design. The ruins of ancient civilizations might not be relics of the distant past, but props placed to create the illusion of age. The records of kings and empires might not describe events that happened thousands of years ago, but scripts written for us to believe in continuity. And the sun, that light switched on in 1492, may have been the most visible act of resetting the stage. A new light for a new cycle. A new sky for a new humanity. It's a terrifying thought, but also strangely liberating. Because if this world is artificial, then the limits we think are absolute. Time, space, history itself might only be part of the design. Maybe that's why, even today, people feel an unshakable sense that something is wrong with the world. That sense of displacement, of unreality, might not be delusion. It might be memory. The faint recollection of the last reset, lingering like a dream after waking. And if that's true, then the next reset may already be being prepared. Because in systems like this, cycles end, light fades, and a new one rises to take its place. But who or what decides when that happens? There comes a point in every great experiment when the instruments fall silent, and the observers become the observed. For ages, our stories trace the outlines of two worlds folded into one, the bright, orderly stage set by light, and the dim backstage where questions gather dust. In this final act, the curtains fall and the true work begins. Not the work of proving a single theory, but the work of reopening the human mind. Imagine a cathedral of glass and copper, constructed by hands that never sought credit. It spans continents and centuries, a device both monstrously simple and impossibly intricate, built to hold a sky. Within its walls, seasons are tuned like notes on an organ, tides orchestrated, winds coaxed, and tides of daylight measured against the metronome of a manufactured sun. The architects are long vanished, their blueprints are scattered as myths, yet the machine keeps humming, clockwork that has outlived its makers. This image is not a literal map of the world, but a metaphor that helps us feel what our evidence suggests, a cosmos that can be arranged, rerouted, and even reset. If the stage can be arranged, then so can the audience be prompted to act. Stories are the stage manager's most efficient tool. Give creatures a past. Give them ruined cities, saints, heroes, and funerary rites, and you'll give them patience for the show. Feed them calendars that predate their memories, and they will learn to wait. Feed them myths, and they will call fiction history. We are creatures shaped by story. Story is how we survive and how we submit, but wonders like hunger have their seasons. The mind that questions is not a bug in the system. It is the system's oldest hazard. When enough minds wake, the architecture shows its seams. In this allegory, our awakening is not the rude crash of a revolution, but the quiet, relentless strain of people who will not let silence stand for consent. Scholars who notice the missing suns in paintings, artisans who stare too long at the geometry of instruments, children who ask why the moon feels colder than the day. Each small insistence is a tear in the veil. Each voice that refuses to accept the given narrative is a lantern carried into the cavern of pretense. Consider the nature of that lantern. It is not a weapon. It is a question bright enough to burn away complacency. The lantern does not demand an answer. It exposes the question. Once exposed, the question spreads, a contagion that is at once dangerous and beautiful. It spreads across cafes and chat rooms, through lecture halls and late-night conversations, sewing together islands of doubt into a continent of inquiry. The more people who carry the lantern, the less plausible the set design becomes. The manager of the stage may respond, but not always with grand gestures. Often the reaction is subtler. New props, altered scripts, a few well-timed explanations meant to close the gap between astonishment and routine. That is how control adapts, not by force alone, but by editing the story. And yet, stories have a life beyond their editors. They mutate. A rumor told in a market becomes legend in a monastery, becomes myth in a parliament. What begins as a whisper about paintings without suns becomes a litany of questions that no single keeper of truth can fully suppress. People who carry true memory, whether fossilized as myth or encoded in the way a hand bends when it plants seed, begin arranging their lives differently. They watch the sky for anomalies, they test the edge of what's allowed, they learn to read the seams. This is where the dream of resistance turns into sustained action. It is not the stuff of sudden clifftop revolutions, but a slow, precise thing, the rebuilding of epistemology. The community of the awakened does not simply reject history. It relearns how to ask about causes, about provenance, about the provenance of the provenance itself. They create new institutions, not to hoard knowledge, but to publish its source codes. Libraries that archive not only texts, but the metadata of their production. Workshops that reproduce old instruments and then push them past their declared limits, searching for signs of artifice. Networks that map anomalies not as curiosities, but as coordinates on a new truth map. The most dramatic changes begin in trivial places. Farmers notice shifts in sowing times and subtly recalibrate their practices. Sailors chart courses by patterns unreadable to official navigation. Small communities experiment with governance models that prize recalability and accountability, structures designed to be revised the moment they veer toward fabrication. In the cities, underground salons become classrooms for the curious, teaching practical skepticism, how to distinguish a careful claim from a clever lie, how to build a model of a thing rather than accept its story, how to test a story's limits until it either proves durable or collapses. All of this is quieter and more arduous than the revolution songs of myth. It is patient work, built on tiny victories, yet its fruits are profound. An epistemic ecosystem in which truth grows like a resilient crop, tended by many hands. When truth becomes communal labor rather than the privilege of an elite, two things happen. First, the sources of doubt lose their power to isolate and discredit. Second, the people themselves become less credulous, less prone to believe that history is a closed book, and more inclined to treat it as a living manuscript. There is also, within this story, a moral hazard. Knowledge without compassion becomes a new architecture of dominion. The awakened must therefore learn to practice humility. To see the world as potentially designed is not to confer guilt on everyone who inhabits it. The play actors and prop menders, once revealed, are still people. Some are collaborators who do harm. Many are cogs woven into a machine they did not build and may not control. The moral task of the awakened is not to lash out at every face that looks familiar, but to carve out spaces where autonomy can be reclaimed and where those who were misled might also be offered the chance to awaken. In the grandest sweep of this epic, awakening is less about overthrowing a puppet master and more about reclaiming authorship. Imagine, momentarily, the world as an unfinished manuscript. The first drafts are messy and contradictory. Editors will always insist on their corrections. Patrons will demand their preferred endings. But if enough people take the pen, the story changes. We don't need to destroy the stage to change the play. We need to insist on a participatory script writing, a public epistemology governed by transparency, reproducibility, and shared stewardship. In such a world, a new kind of light arises. Not an engineered sun, but the collective illumination of many minds. And what might that new light look like? It is not the sudden flash of apocalypse, but the long burn of 1,000 small lamps. It is schools that teach the history of doubt, museums that display provenance as proudly as artifacts, and journals that publish both successful replications and honest failures. It is policy that insists on audit trails for narratives that shape nations and markets. It is art that refuses to comfort the viewer into complacency and instead asks the hard questions that make the eyes wide. In this imagined renewal, the human capacity to narrate becomes a capacity to steward, to tell stories that do not imprison, but invite. There is a final, almost sacred dimension to this awakening. It reveals an ethic about how to treat the unknown. Mystery ceases to be a mere puzzle to be solved and becomes a space for reverence. We do not have to accept comfortless doubt. We do not have to fetishize ignorance. Instead, we can learn to live with a courageous curiosity, a posture that honors the limits of knowledge while relentlessly testing them. In that posture, wonder and rigor are not enemies, but allies. So what is the last word of this thought experiment? It is that awakening is both the end of abdication and the beginning of responsibility. To look up and suspect design is not by itself a betrayal of human dignity. It can be a call to take responsibility for how we narrate the world and for the futures those narratives produce. We may never know whether some vast architecture was ever erected above us or whether our ancestors simply misremembered. But we can know this. The act of questioning, of seeking better evidence and better discourse, will always be the instrument by which we reclaim some measure of control over our collective fate. If you felt stirred by this voyage, the paintings, the instruments, the vanished words, and the speculative terrarium, then you have already begun the work. Keep the lantern. Teach others how to hold it. Build institutions that prefer clarity to comfort. And when you encounter the familiar stories that claim to be final, say gently but firmly, not so fast. If this story moved you, subscribe to Archivist's Vaults for more voyages into hard-to-believe possibilities and elegant thought experiments. Share your own theory or image of what awakening looks like in the comments. Your perspective may be the lantern someone else needs. And if you want to keep thinking, watch our next film, an exploration of maps and the myths they carry, where we trace how cartography has both revealed and concealed worlds. If you've stayed with us through this journey, from missing suns to hidden histories, thank you for daring to wonder. Subscribe to Archivist's Vault to keep exploring the unknown corners of our past, our cosmos, and our own minds. Leave a comment. What do you think the sun really represents? Your perspective might be the spark for our next investigation. Until next time, Keep your eyes open and your questions brighter than the light itself.